On the day our families met to discuss the wedding, my future mother-in-law announced that I had to quit my job and become a stay-at-home housewife. My mother slammed her hand on the table and canceled the wedding, making the groom's entire family turn pale. I thought the day my mother called off her daughter's wedding in front of both families would be the most shameful day of my life. Who could have known that on that day, my mother pulled me out of a trap wrapped in beautiful words, blush-pink invitations, and promises as sweet as honey. That day, right in the middle of a nice waterfront restaurant, in front of all his relatives, Barbara slid a piece of paper across the table. It clearly stated, "Within 3 months after the wedding, Samantha must resign from her corporate job to help run the family appliance store." All the monetary wedding gifts were to be handed over to her for safekeeping. To give any financial help to my own mother, I would have to ask my husband's permission for every single penny. After having a baby, I wouldn't be allowed to return to work without the groom's family's consent. I held that piece of paper, and my hands were as cold as if I had just plunged them into ice water. And Christopher, the man who was supposed to be my husband, the one who always said he loved me for my independence, just lowered his head and sighed. "Sam, don't overcomplicate things. Mom is just looking out for us." One simple phrase was enough to shatter 2 years of love in my heart. Before I could even respond, my mother stood up. Her thin hand slammed down on the table with such force that the coffee cups jumped and the silverware clattered. She didn't scream or cry. She just looked directly at the groom's family and articulated every single word. "There will be no wedding." A dead silence fell over the table. At that moment, I felt like my life had shattered into a million pieces. But looking back now, I realized that if my mother hadn't slammed the table that day, I probably would have signed my own death warrant. My name is Samantha. I am 31 years old. I am the chief financial accountant, CPA, at a large logistics company in our city. At first glance, my job seems dry. Invoices, balance sheets, tax compliance, payroll, and freight audits. But for me, this profession isn't just an air-conditioned office and a steady direct deposit. It represents 8 years of climbing the ladder on my own. I stayed up past midnight studying to pass my CPA exams. I ate microwave mac and cheese while reconciling accounts that were off by just a few cents. I'd been chewed out by my boss for late reports, rushed by clients over incorrect routing codes, and argued with the IRS until my throat was raw, all while keeping a polite smile. Accounting isn't a glamorous field, but anyone in it knows that one small error in a spreadsheet can trigger a mountain of massive problems. So, whenever someone says, "Why does a woman need to work so hard? Just get married, your husband will provide," I just smile. I smile, but to myself, I think, a husband can provide dinner, but no one can feed your self-worth for your entire life. My father, Peter, died when I was a freshman in high school. We were incredibly poor back then. So poor that during heavy rainstorms, my mom and I had to set out plastic buckets to catch the water dripping from the kitchen ceiling. My mother, Mary, was an elementary school teacher. She taught classes in the morning, and in the afternoons she tutored neighborhood kids. At night, she sat under the yellow light of our cheap lamp, mending my clothes. Her eyes would squint from exhaustion, but she always said, "Sam, just focus on your education. I can handle any hardship." My mom never complained about life. This woman went her whole life without knowing expensive makeup or fancy steakhouses, but her school blouses were always perfectly ironed, her hair neatly pulled back, and her speech measured and articulate. She lived like an oak tree in the yard, straight, sturdy, not casting much of a shadow, but never bending in the wind. When I got my first real paycheck, I tried to give almost all of it to my mom. She refused. She only took a single $20 bill, folded it neatly, and said, "The money you earn, you need to know how to keep. Loving your mother is good, but first and foremost, you must love and respect yourself. When a woman gets married, she can compromise. She can be patient, but she should never, with her own hands, cut off her route of retreat." I heard that phrase so many times I knew it by heart. In my 20s, I thought my mom was just overly anxious. People love each other and get married. Why think so heavily about an escape route? But my mom would just smile sadly. "Honey, when there is love, even a glass of tap water tastes sweet. When love fades, they'll hand you the bill for a crust of stale bread." I grew up on those words, not cynical, but sober. They didn't teach me to distrust men. They just warned me against blind faith. against handing my fate entirely into someone else's hands. Therefore, I always thought that when I got married, I would be a good daughter-in-law. I would respect the elders, keep up with family traditions, remember holidays, and understand that family dinners are the foundation of a household. I wasn't the type of woman who immediately puts up walls at the mention of her in-laws. On the contrary, I dreamed of gaining another home, another set of parents to respect, and more family to love. I just didn't expect that someone would use the concept of family tradition to force me to abandon my career, the title of daughter-in-law to gag me, and the word family to cut me off from my own mother. Before meeting Christopher, my life was pretty quiet. Work in the morning, grab groceries on the way home, dinner with Mom. Our house was in a quiet suburban neighborhood. We had a maple tree in the front yard that Mom planted years ago. Our dinners were simple meatloaf, mashed potatoes, maybe a casserole, but it was always warm. Mom often said, "We aren't rich, but we don't owe anyone a dime, and we don't bow down for dirty money. That's enough." I believed that was enough until Chris walked into my life with his calm demeanor, his ability to listen, and his promise that he would never make me give up the job I loved. I believed him. I believed him so deeply that I forgot my mother's advice. To understand a man, don't listen to how he talks about love. Look at what he chooses when he has to stand between the truth and his own comfort. And I paid for that belief with a wedding that never happened. I met Chris on a rainy evening in late August. It had been pouring in the city since morning. My company was applying for a massive commercial loan to open a new refrigerated warehouse for export goods. Chris, representing the bank's commercial credit division, was in charge of auditing our financials. My first impression of him wasn't anything spectacular. White button-down shirt, dark slacks, a neat haircut, carrying a leather portfolio. He spoke calmly, without any arrogant corporate flair. He asked precise questions, took careful notes, and if he didn't understand a logistics term, he asked for clarification instead of pretending to know it all. At that time, my accounting department was total chaos. The loan required a mountain of paperwork, profit and loss statements, freight contracts, bank reconciliations, aging reports. My boss was rushing me on one end, the bank wanted new files on the other, and I was simultaneously preparing the month-end close. My brain was practically begging for retirement. Chris saw my desk buried in files and just smiled slightly. "Samantha, don't rush. I'll write down a list of whatever is missing. We'll add them line by line. Haste is a bad advisor in finance. The numbers might get offended." I laughed. The joke wasn't hilarious, but in the middle of a high-stress day, it felt like a glass of ice water. After our first meeting, Chris texted me to confirm the list of documents. His messages were professional. He didn't bother me after hours or flirt aggressively. I always hated guys who called you babe or sweetheart right after meeting, so Chris's restraint appealed to me. Later, he started coming to the office more often, sometimes for a signature, sometimes to check original contracts. Every time he walked into the department, he politely greeted everyone. One day, noticing I hadn't taken a lunch break, he placed a yogurt and a granola bar on my desk. "Eat something, otherwise you'll be reconciling accounts on an empty stomach. That's a surefire way to see 1-0 instead of 2. I looked him up and down. "Are you a banker or a dietitian?" He laughed. "I'm a banker, which is why I'm terrified the chief accountant is going to pass out. If you go down, our loan application goes down with you." Chris's charm lay exactly in that. He joked in moderation, showed care, but never made me feel like I was being hunted. After the loan was approved, I thought we would stop talking. But Chris occasionally texted, asking how the new warehouse was operating. Gradually, we moved from work topics to books, food, and how our city's traffic was a nightmare. He told me he was the youngest son. He had an older sister who was already married. His family lived in Oakbridge, a suburb about 20 miles out. They owned a local appliance store that his parents had built over 20 years ago. He spoke warmly of his father. "My dad's a great guy, spends his whole life managing the warehouse and delivering fridges to customers." Regarding his mom, he said she ran everything, was a bit strict, but loved her kids fiercely. I listened and smiled. Older women, especially those who spent decades in retail, are often tough. That's normal. I had no idea that the word strict could be so encompassing that it could bind another person's life. 3 months later, Chris officially asked me out. He didn't make a huge scene with a dozen roses in public. He just waited until we were having dinner at a small riverside grill, and while walking me to my car, he said, "Sam, I know you're a serious person who lives by the rules. I don't want to intrude on your life if I don't have serious intentions. Please give me a chance to be with you." I paused, not because I didn't like him, but because I had outgrown the age where a few sweet words guarantee a yes. At 30, a woman looks at love differently. You don't just look at whether the man loves you, but whether he respects the life you've already built. I asked him, "Does it bother you that I'm a woman who is so busy she sometimes opens her laptop at home to work?" Chris immediately shook his head. "I like you exactly because you're independent, a woman who has a career, her own thoughts, and takes responsibility for herself that's incredibly valuable. If we ever get married, I never want you to give up the career you've put so much effort into." That phrase melted my heart. I brought Chris home to meet my mom about 6 months into our relationship. That evening, Mom cooked a simple dinner: baked salmon, roasted asparagus, and wild rice. Chris ate with a healthy appetite and complimented her cooking. He politely called her ma'am and got up to help clear the table. My mom didn't say much outwardly, but I knew she liked him. When Chris left, my mom stood on the porch, watching his car until it disappeared around the corner. I asked nervously, "So, what do you think, Mom?" Mom wiped her hands on a dish towel and said slowly, "He's polite. He pays attention. But honey, it's easy to love you when everything is calm. What matters is whose side he'll take when problems arise, the side of truth or the side with the least hassle." I pouted. "Mom, you sound like I'm going off to war." She smiled and patted my head. "Marriage is a big battle, sweetie. It's just that you wear a wedding dress instead of armor." I laughed, thinking Mom was just being an anxious parent. At the time, Chris was consistently gentle and attentive, making me believe he was a mature man. On weekends, we'd drive along the riverfront. He told me he wanted to buy a small house in the future. "It doesn't have to be a mansion, as long as it has a cozy kitchen and a home office for you." A year later, Chris proposed. There was no flashy flash mob, just a simple white gold ring that fit perfectly. He said, "I can't promise you a life of luxury, but I promise to respect you, to respect your mother, and to build an honest family with you." I cried, not because of the diamond, but because I believed that promise. They say flies swarm to honey, but some promises aren't sickeningly sweet. They are just warm, making you believe even more. I trusted Chris, abandoning the caution of a woman who had watched her mother live half her life alone. I didn't know then that some people betray you not because they fall out of love. They betray you with silence, right when you need them to speak up the most. Right before the holidays, Chris took me to meet his family. His house was in Oakbridge, a typical sprawling suburb. The drive wasn't long, but the closer we got, the more nervous I felt. They say finding a good mother-in-law is a blessing for 3 generations. I just hoped to be accepted with basic decency. Chris's family home was quite large, facing a main commercial street. The ground floor and front lot served as their appliance store, Oakbridge Appliances. A bright sign caught the eye. Banners advertising holiday sales on washers, dryers, and air conditioners hung everywhere. The warehouse was in the back. Occasionally, a delivery box truck would pull out, loaded with water heaters or stoves. As soon as we parked, Chris whispered, "Make yourself at home. Mom can be a little intense, but she has a big heart." I nodded, smoothing out my dress. I wore a nice sage green dress my mom had ironed for me that morning. Her parting words were, "Be polite and sincere in someone else's home, but don't demean yourself. A tree only stands tall if it has roots." Barbara, Chris's mother, met me at the door. She was in her 50s, her hair perfectly blown out, wearing just the right shade of lipstick, a gold chain around her neck, and a shiny bracelet. It was obvious she was a woman used to being in charge, whose word carried weight in the house. She smiled broadly. "Oh, Samantha, you are so much prettier in person than in pictures. Come in, come in. I've been waiting for you all morning. Lunch is ready." I smiled politely. "Thank you for having me, Barbara. Nice to meet you." George, Chris's dad, walked in from the warehouse. His flannel shirt was a bit dusty from cardboard boxes. He gave me a firm, kind handshake and smiled warmly. "Come on in, kiddo. Grab a plate. Must be tired from the drive." He didn't say much, but there was no judgment in his eyes. That calmed me a bit. Also present was Megan, Chris's older sister. She was married, but according to Chris, she stopped by her parents' house almost every day, either to help at the store or drop her kids off for lunch. She looked me up and down. "You're thinner in person. Must be all that corporate stress. Being a CPA is rough, huh?" "It gets busy," I replied, "but I'm used to it." Lunch was heavy: pot roast, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and freshly baked rolls. Barbara constantly scooped more food onto my plate, saying, "Eat up, honey, don't be shy. We're going to be one family soon." The words "one family" warmed my heart. I even scolded myself for being overly tense. But halfway through the meal, Barbara's questions shifted direction. "Samantha, as a chief accountant, your salary must be pretty high, right?" I was slightly embarrassed but smiled. "It's enough to live comfortably and help my mom out." Barbara set her fork down. Her voice remained soft, but her eyes were sharp. "At a big corporate logistics firm, the bonuses must be nice. A CPA means you hold all the company's income, expenses, and invoices in your hands." "Well," I answered carefully, "I'm responsible for my division's compliance. Cash flow is controlled by the system. You can't just do whatever you want." She chuckled. "I was just asking. I'm happy for Chris that he found such a smart fiancé. When a man marries a woman who knows how to count money, there's less waste in the house." It sounded like a compliment, but somehow I felt I had just been appraised for my money-saving capabilities. Megan chimed in. "You probably send your mom money every month, right? Chris said your mom lives alone." I looked at Chris. He was picking at his roast beef as if the question was completely normal. I kept my tone polite. "Yes, I help my mom out every month. She never asks for anything, but I like to help her out with groceries and medical expenses." Barbara gave a tight smile, putting another roll on my plate. "A daughter loving her mother is a good thing, but when you get married, you need to understand which household comes first. It doesn't look good if a husband is financially supporting his wife's entire side of the family. People talk." The food got stuck in my throat. Since I was a child, my mother had never asked me for a single dime. Every amount I sent her was voluntary, from the pure heart of a child whose mother had raised her through blood, sweat, and tears. But in Barbara's mouth, it suddenly became a burden that could tarnish my future husband's reputation. I wanted to say something, but looking at the table and realizing it was my first visit, I swallowed my words. Wisdom is knowing when to speak. That day, I chose silence, not because I agreed, but to save Chris's face. Noticing my silence, Chris passed me the gravy. "Eat some more. Mom's an amazing cook." I gave a weak smile, but nobody pressed further. After lunch, Barbara took me to see the store. She pointed at the rows of refrigerators and washing machines, boasting that she and her husband had built this business for over 20 years. Pride swelled in her voice. "I just hope the kids will help out later. The foundation is there. Young people just need to maintain and grow it, not just think about themselves." Hearing the phrase, "think about themselves," my heart felt heavy again. Somehow, all her conversations boiled down to one thing. If you enter this family, you must put this family above everything else. On the drive back, the evening air was cool, but my chest felt tight. Chris was driving slowly and asked, "So, how did you like my family?" I stayed quiet for a moment, then told the truth. "Your mom asked a lot of very specific questions about money and how I help my mom. It made me uncomfortable." Chris sighed. "Mom's in retail. She's used to grilling people on the details. Plus, the older generation often thinks that when a daughter gets married, she should focus on her husband's household first. Don't take it to heart." I turned to him. "But I only have my mom. I can't just treat her like a stranger because I'm getting married." Chris hurried to reassure me. "I know, I'm not saying you shouldn't take care of Mary. I'll talk to Mom later. I'll find the right words." Back then, I didn't realize how dangerous those words were. I just comforted myself by thinking that every family has its quirks. A strict mother-in-law isn't a disaster, as long as the man beside you understands and defends you. I tried to believe that, but a tiny grain of sand was left in my eye after that lunch. Not enough to make you cry immediately, but it scratches, and the more you blink, the more it hurts. After that visit, I kept interacting with Chris's family. Outwardly, everything was fine. Barbara still called me honey, and occasionally sent us care packages, some homemade preserves or baked goods. I kept up appearances too, bringing a pie or a nice bottle of wine every time we visited. Mom taught me to always be grateful and polite. But some things don't show up loudly. They seep in slowly, like rainwater through an old roof. First, a wet spot in the corner, and only over time do you realize the whole ceiling is ruined. One Saturday evening, Chris took me to our favorite waterfront restaurant. While we were eating, his phone rang. I saw Mom flash on the screen. He answered, lowering his voice. "Yeah, Mom, we're having dinner." "Yeah, I know. I'll talk to Sam about it later." I looked up. "What did your mom want?" Chris looked a bit flustered, adding hot sauce to his food. "Nothing major. She was just wondering if you plan to keep working at your company after the wedding, or if you're going to take a leave of absence." I put my fork down. "We already talked about this. I'm not quitting my job." Chris gave a pacifying smile. "I know. Mom's just worried because your job is so stressful, and after the wedding, when we have kids, it'll be hard on you." I stared at him. I wasn't angry yet, just confused. We weren't even married, and my resignation was already being discussed as a given. It felt wrong. A few days later, his sister Megan texted me. She started very sweetly. "Sammy, I want to tell you something. Please don't take it the wrong way. I view you as a sister, so I'm giving you advice." I replied, "Sure, Megan, what is it?" She sent a massive paragraph, the essence of which was that her mother had worked her fingers to the bone to build the business, and now hoped her daughter-in-law would help run it. A married woman shouldn't get too obsessed with corporate careers. Losing a job at a company is no big deal. You can find another one. But losing your mother-in-law's favor, that makes life really hard, Sam. Reading it, I sighed. The words were soft, but their meaning was heavy as a rock. I replied very measuredly, "I understand, Megan. I will fulfill my obligations to Chris's family, but my current career is the result of years of hard work, and I have no intention of throwing it away." Megan immediately replied, "I'm just afraid you're thinking too modern. Women don't compete over who has the higher salary, but who can maintain family happiness. My mom doesn't like daughters-in-law who sit at a computer all day while the cooking and family holidays are left to others." I held the phone for a long time. An image of my mother popped into my head, grading papers late into the night, being both mother and father, the sole provider. If my mother also believed that a woman's value only came from leaning on a husband's family, my life would have gone down a very different path. That evening, I showed the texts to Chris. He read them and frowned. "Megan's crossing the line. She's like that, loves to lecture. Just ignore her." I asked, "Did you explain to her and your mom that I won't be quitting after the wedding?" Chris paused for a few seconds. "I'll tell them, but right now, right before the wedding, it's not worth ruining the mood over minor things. After the wedding, I'll find the right words. Mom loves me. If I explain it slowly, she'll understand." I heard "after the wedding," and my heart sank. It seemed he was pushing all the difficult conversations until after the wedding, as if the wedding was a magic bridge, and once I crossed it, I would automatically become softer, more compliant, a totally different person. But I still loved Chris, and love makes you look for excuses. I thought, he's the youngest son, used to listening to his mom. He doesn't want tension in the house. Guys are just clumsy at navigating between their mothers and their wives. They say a bad peace is better than a good quarrel. I decided to endure it a little longer, as long as Chris was honest with me. But enduring isn't the same as lying to yourself. In the following days, Barbara started calling me directly more often. One day, she asked, "Sammy, can you take an unpaid leave of absence for a few months at your company? You newlyweds will be working all the time, the house will be empty, and Chris will be eating takeout. That's no good." I answered, "I get paid vacation time, Barbara, but taking a prolonged leave of absence isn't practical. I'm managing a lot of important tax filings right now." She scoffed. "Someone else can do your corporate work, but working for your husband's family, that's a lifelong job, honey." Once again, a lump formed in my throat. I wanted to ask her, is my own mother not lifelong? Is my career not my life? But I just said, I'll try to manage my time as best as I can. Barbara went quiet for a second, then said, "That's right. A smart girl knows what to prioritize. I'm telling you this so your life goes smoothly." After that call, I sat at my desk for a long time. On my screen was an aging report of client debts. The numbers stood in straight lines. I was used to clarity. A debt is a debt. A payment is a payment. An error gets fixed. If a document is missing, you request it. But in personal relationships, especially with future in-laws, there was no spreadsheet to check how far things had deviated from the norm. That night at dinner, I told my mom everything. She listened without interrupting, without scolding Chris or criticizing his family. She just slowly put a piece of fish on my plate and said, "Honey, when they ask you once, it's concern. When they ask you the same thing over and over, it's pressure. You need to distinguish between the two." I stayed silent. Mom added, "When you get married, I don't need you to marry into a rich family. I need you to enter a home where, when you speak the truth, you are heard." Those words hit me right in the chest. I lowered my head and kept eating. But dinner that night tasted like ashes. From that day on, one question kept spinning in my head. If my career is already being discussed as something disposable before the wedding, what else will they decide for me after the wedding? I didn't have an answer. Or rather, I vaguely saw the answer, but lacked the courage to say it out loud. In late December, Chris's family hosted a memorial wake for his grandfather. Chris said I should come help out and get to know the extended family before the wedding. I agreed. Although my heart was still unsettled by Barbara and Megan's pressure about me quitting, I wanted to keep the peace. A wedding isn't just two people holding hands, it's a long-term relationship between two families. I woke up early that morning. Mom gave me a box of pastries to take, saying, "When there's a wake at someone's house, help with the chores, but observe. A family's true character shows best during these big gatherings." I chuckled. "Mom, you sound like a detective." Mom smiled, but her eyes were serious. "Not a detective, just an experienced woman. You can tell by looking at one dinner table whether a family genuinely loves each other, or if they're just playing to the gallery." I carried those words all the way to Chris's house. That day, Oakbridge Appliances was half closed. Banners for New Year's sales still hung out front, and smoke from the barbecue smoker billowed from the backyard. Walking in, I heard the clatter of knives, shouting, and kids laughing. Seeing me, Barbara announced happily, "Samantha's here. Go help set the plates. Such a proactive future daughter-in-law. The relatives will be thrilled." I nodded politely, dropped my bag, and headed to the kitchen. The spread was massive. Casseroles, fried chicken, potato salad, baked beans, pies. The women of the family were cooking and discussing the wedding, occasionally casting glances at me. Aunt Brenda, Chris's aunt, said, "She's a pretty girl. Here she's a CPA, a smart one. That means she'll count the money in her husband's house. No waste." Barbara immediately chimed in proudly. "Oh, Samantha knows taxes, bank audits, the whole 9 yards. Nowadays, someone who knows their way around financial paperwork is worth their weight in gold." Setting down a stack of plates, I froze. I wasn't used to this kind of praise. It sounded as if I was being presented as a product with a specific set of features. Knows taxes, knows banks, can save money. Chris, standing nearby, smiled. "Sam's very meticulous, Aunt Brenda. Her whole company relies on her." I looked at him. There was nothing suspicious in his gaze, just pride in his girlfriend. But somehow, combining his praise with Barbara's calculating look made me very uneasy. Closer to lunch, as I was carrying a tray of iced tea, I saw a woman in her 40s standing near the driveway. She wore a gray blouse, her hair pulled into a low ponytail, holding a stack of papers in a plastic folder. Her face looked exhausted, but her eyes were piercingly clear. Barbara stepped out of the house, and her face shifted. The cheerful hostess persona vanished. "Lauren, what are you doing here? Give that here." The woman named Lauren replied quietly, "I brought the final invoices. There are a few items you'd better verify before the year-end close." Barbara glanced around quickly and lowered her voice. "I know, today is a memorial. Don't talk about business." I was standing close enough to hear. Lauren turned and looked at me. Her gaze lingered on my face longer than normal. It wasn't the judging look of a relative. It was the look of someone who had waded through a swamp and sees another person about to step onto the same path, unsure if she should stop them. Noticing this, Barbara said dismissively, "Oh, this is Samantha, Chris's future wife, and this is Lauren, the former bookkeeper for our store." We didn't see eye to eye, so she quit. The words "former bookkeeper" caught my attention. I said hello. Lauren nodded, saying very quietly, "Hello," and nothing else. But I couldn't forget her eyes. They weren't cold, angry or curious. They were the eyes of someone biting her tongue. Barbara quickly snatched the folder from her, shoved it into her bag, and said, "Go on, we'll deal with this after the holidays." Lauren looked at Barbara. Her lips moved as if she wanted to add something, but ultimately she just nodded and walked toward the street. Passing me, she slowed her step. I heard her let out a very quiet, suppressed sigh. The wake was loud. The older folks sat at 2 tables inside, the younger ones on the patio. People were drinking beer and whiskey, giving toasts, repeatedly bringing up my wedding with Chris. Barbara was glowing. "I just dream that after the wedding, Sammy will be closer, helping me with the house and the store's accounting. Such a smart girl. It's a shame she's slaving away for corporate America." Everyone laughed. Someone added, "Exactly. You gotta think about your own family business, not some stranger's company." I lowered my head and picked up a piece of cornbread that suddenly tasted like ash. The words sounded cheerful, but if you thought about it, they were bizarre. My job, my efforts, my salary. Why were they suddenly considered useless in their eyes? Slaving away for corporate America. Yet their store, which I hadn't even married into yet, was already being treated as my obligation. Chris touched my hand under the table. "Are you tired?" I shook my head. "No, just ate too much." I didn't tell the truth, because in the middle of a family party, the truth would sound like oversensitivity. Late that evening, when almost everything was cleaned up, I went into the backyard to wash my hands at the patio sink. The night air was cool. I looked toward the store entrance and saw Barbara standing alone by the counter. She pulled the folder Lauren had brought out of her bag and rapidly flipped through it. Then, hearing George's footsteps from the warehouse, she hastily shoved the folder into a desk drawer and locked it with a key. It was a fleeting action, but it was enough to make my stomach drop. Ever since I entered the accounting field, I was used to working with documents. I knew how people handled important files. Some hide things out of caution, others hide things because they don't want to be caught. I didn't dare jump to conclusions, but my professional intuition screamed that something was wrong here. On the drive home, Chris asked, "So, how was the extended family?" I stared at the highway traffic and gave a vague answer. "Lively. But it felt like your mom was overly praising my job." Chris smiled. "She's just proud. In a family of retailers, they value someone who can crunch numbers." I didn't say anything else. Maybe Barbara really did value someone who could crunch numbers. I just started to fear she didn't value me as a person, but only my CPA license. When I got home that night, Mom was sitting at the kitchen table peeling potatoes. Her shadow stretched across the wall under the yellow light. Hearing me come in, she looked up. "You're back, honey. How did it go?" I took off my jacket and sat next to her. The wind rustled the maple leaves outside. I don't know why, but the moment I saw my mom, everything I had held back all day rushed to my throat. I told her how Barbara paraded me in front of the relatives, how everyone kept mentioning my accounting degree, taxes, and bank audits as if it were my dowry. I told her about Lauren's look, and how Barbara frantically locked the documents away when George approached. Mom listened without interrupting, without scolding Chris or bashing his family. When I finished, she asked, "And what did Chris say?" I fell silent. "He said his mom is proud, that retail families value people who know math." Mom set aside a peeled potato and asked evenly, "And about his mom constantly telling you to quit? Did Chris make it clear to her?" I looked down at my hands. "He said he'd find the right words after the wedding." Mom looked up at me. There was no reproach in her eyes, just sadness. "Sam, the right things are easiest to say before the wedding. If you put it off until you're already living in their house, your voice will be much, much quieter." I stayed quiet. Mom got up to put the pot of potatoes on the stove. A warm, comforting steam rose from it. She was making me a late dinner. Sitting back down, Mom placed a slice of meatloaf on my plate and said, "You love him, I know, and I don't want you breaking up over a few words. But I'll ask you honestly, if a conflict arises between the mother-in-law and the wife, will Chris stand on the side of truth, or will he just tell you to endure it for the sake of peace?" I held my fork but couldn't bring it to my mouth. That question, delivered without yelling or pressure, felt like a boulder resting on my chest. I remembered all the times Chris had said, "Mom's strict. Megan just likes to lecture. I'll find the right words after the wedding. Don't ruin the mood over minor things." He had never once said, "I will make it crystal clear to my mom." He had never once said, "Your career is your right." I loved Chris, but love didn't make me so blind that I couldn't see this void. I tried to defend him. He's probably just afraid of upsetting his mom. He's the youngest. She took care of him, so he respects her. Mom smiled faintly, but it was a joyless smile. Respecting a mother is good. A decent man should be dutiful, but being dutiful doesn't mean letting his mother make decisions for his wife. An honest man has nothing to fear, but if the man standing next to you constantly bows his head, it's very hard to lean on him, sweetheart. I kept my head down and ate. The food was delicious, but I swallowed it with difficulty. A little while later, the doorbell rang. It was Chris, holding a bag of oranges and a box of chocolates. He smiled. "Good evening, Mary. I just wanted to drop off some treats and discuss the wedding invitations with Sam." Mom wiped her hands and invited him in. She was as polite as ever, poured him hot tea, and set out a fruit bowl. I watched Chris sitting across from my mom, polite as always, and scolded myself for having bad thoughts. Mom asked a few questions about the wedding date, the guest list, and the arrangements. Chris answered smoothly, but when Mom asked where we planned to live after the wedding, he hesitated. "Well, at first we'll live with my parents to keep them company, and then, when we save up enough, we'll look for our own place." Mom clarified. "At first? Is that 6 months, a year, or until your parents agree to let you go?" Chris gave a strained smile. "Well, we'll see how it goes, Mary. The house is big. My parents are getting older, so living together will be convenient to help take care of them." I looked at him. There was nothing criminal in his answer, but it was incredibly vague. And in a marriage, the vaguest things usually become the cause of the biggest fights. Mom asked again, in the same soft voice, "And what about Samantha's job? I heard your mother wants her to quit after the wedding." Chris set his teacup down. His eyes darted to the side. "Yes, Mom's just worried that Sam will burn out. She has a stressful corporate job, up late at night. Mom thinks that if she takes a break to take care of the family, it'll be better for her health." Mom stared at Chris for a long time. "And what do you think?" Chris paused for a few seconds. "I respect Sam, but I also hope she understands my mom. My mom spent her whole life in retail. She's used to planning ahead for everything." Listening to him, my insides turned to ice. He said he respected me, but in the next breath he pushed me to understand his mother. His words sounded incredibly smooth, but ultimately he drew no boundaries. When Chris left, Mom didn't say anything. She just cleared the cups and went to the sink to wash them. I stood next to her, watching the water run over her hands. "Mom, do you not like Chris anymore?" Mom shook her head. "It's not about liking him or not. I just see that he's too soft." I sighed. "Soft is a good thing, Mom." Mom turned to me. "Soft, but without his own opinion. When the storm hits, the person standing next to him is the one who will suffer the most." I didn't know what to say. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night. Outside, the traffic died down. The neighborhood sank into silence. My phone lit up with a text from Chris. "Good night. Don't overthink things. Everything will be fine." I stared at those words. Previously, when he texted that, I felt calm. But that night, I suddenly realized that some things don't just become fine on their own. If you don't agree on certain things beforehand, they eventually turn into a rope that slowly tightens around your neck. I still loved Chris. But from that day on, a pause entered my love. A small pause, but enough for me to hear my own voice asking, is this love enough to survive entering a family that, from day one, wants me to live by their blueprint? In early February, Chris's family invited my mom and me to a meeting at a nice restaurant on the riverfront to discuss the final wedding details. Barbara picked the venue, a private dining room, and even pre-ordered the menu. Chris said his mom wanted everything to be perfect because they knew the owners. I didn't object. Despite all my doubts, I hoped the meeting would go smoothly and the families would maintain a good relationship. That morning, Mom woke up early. She put on her navy blue dress, not new, but perfectly pressed. I offered to let her wear a new dress I had bought for her. Mom just smiled. "I'm going to meet relatives, not to show off. The main thing is to look neat and dignified." I watched my mom standing in front of the mirror, her hair neatly pinned up, her face almost completely free of makeup but looking so stoic, and my heart felt heavy. This woman had saved money her whole life and never asked me for a thing. And today, she would have to sit in front of the groom's family and listen to them dictate my life. There were 4 of us on our side: Mom, me, Uncle Frank, and Aunt Carol. Uncle Frank, Mom's brother, was a retired civil servant, a man of few words but highly observant. Aunt Carol, Mom's cousin, was a sweet lady who came mostly for moral support so Mom wouldn't feel outnumbered. Before we left, Mom took my hand and said quietly, "Whatever happens, listen until the end. Don't lose your temper. But if you feel they are stepping on your dignity, know how to stand your ground." I nodded. I thought she was just giving standard advice. I didn't know those words would become the central theme of the meeting. The restaurant sat right on the water. When Mom and I arrived, the groom's family was mostly there. Barbara sat at the head of the table in a burgundy velvet dress. Next to her, George was silently drinking iced tea. Megan sat next to her mother, eyes glued to her phone. Aunt Brenda and the other relatives were chatting animatedly. Seeing us, Barbara stood up and laughed loudly. "Oh, Mary is here. Come in, sit down. Today we are all one family. Make yourselves at home." My mom smiled. "Thank you, Barbara. The kids love each other, and we adults need to discuss things properly." Barbara nodded, but her tone carried the authority of someone in charge. "Exactly. A wedding is a big deal. In our family, everything is always done clearly and transparently. It's better to agree on everything in advance so there are no hard feelings later." I heard the words, "agree in advance," and my heart skipped a beat. Chris pulled out a chair for me next to him. He was wearing a light blue button-down. His face looked a bit tense. I whispered, "What's wrong?" He shook his head. "Nothing. Just a lot of people. A little tired." I didn't really believe him. Chris wasn't afraid of crowds. He was a banker who dealt with clients all day. His nervousness looked like the state of a man who knows an unpleasant conversation is coming, but lacks the guts to stop it. At first, everything followed protocol. Both sides asked about each other's health, made small talk about the holidays, and the servers brought out appetizers, calamari, spinach dip, and drinks. Barbara bragged endlessly about her store, how they sold a record number of fridges and AC units at the end of the year. Aunt Brenda chimed in. "Barbara is so lucky. Her son works at a bank, her daughter married well, the store is booming. She brings a daughter-in-law into the house, and everything is already set up for her. She won't have to worry about a thing." My mom just smiled politely. "A good foundation is valuable, but the young couple will have to build their own happiness. That's what makes it strong." Barbara instantly replied, "True, but you have to build upon the family foundation. If the roots pull in different directions, the tree won't grow." The metaphor was light, but I caught the hint. Mom probably did too, but she didn't argue. Then they moved to the wedding date. Barbara said she wanted it in May because an astrologer advised it. Mom replied that we needed to check our work schedules, but generally, if the kids agreed, our side had no issues. We discussed the registry, the bridal party, the number of tables. Everything looked very civil. If it had ended there, you would think the groom's family was incredibly caring, but I noticed that every time my mom made a suggestion, Barbara smiled and smoothly steered the conversation her way, like a helmsman who lets the current carry the boat but keeps a tight grip on the oars. The main courses arrived. The atmosphere seemed cheerful, but I felt restless. It felt like the air right before a severe thunderstorm. The sky is still bright, but you can already smell the wet earth. Halfway through dinner, when the talk about the registry died down, Barbara set down her fork. The clink wasn't loud, but it was enough to make everyone at the table go quiet. She looked at my mom, her smile tightening. "Mary, we've got the date settled, but I want to lay a few things out in advance so there are no misunderstandings later. We are bringing a daughter-in-law into our home, not a corporate employee who leaves in the morning, comes back at night, only cares about her company, and neglects the household." I turned to Chris. All the color drained from his face. My mom sat up straight, her hands resting in her lap. Her voice was calm. "Go ahead, Barbara. If it's reasonable and fair, we'll discuss it." Barbara reached down and pulled a red folder from her bag. At that moment, my throat went completely dry. In front of me was a table full of hot food. The AC hummed overhead. Outside the window, the river flowed slowly. But I knew this meeting had just veered onto a different road, a road the groom's family had paved in advance, waiting for Mom and me to step onto it. Barbara pulled out a folded piece of A4 paper. White paper, clear printed text, with a heading at the top. Post-wedding conditions. Seeing those words, my heart hammered. We hadn't even had the wedding. We weren't officially in-laws yet, and the groom's family had already drafted conditions. And the craziest part was that I, the main subject, was seeing this for the first time. Barbara slid the paper toward my mom. Her voice was unfazed. "Mary, take a look, just so everything is clear. I'm not saying this to make Samantha's life difficult, but so that when they live together, there won't be any conflicts." Mom didn't take the paper right away. She looked at Barbara, then at Chris. "Chris, did you know about this?" Chris lowered his head. That single movement was enough to make my heart turn to ice. Barbara scoffed. "Chris is my son. Of course he knows about our family's affairs. But sometimes men feel awkward bringing these things up, so we adults are spelling it out." My mom picked up the paper. Sitting next to her, I could see every line. Item 1. After the wedding, the couple must live with the husband's parents for a minimum of 3 years and cannot rent or buy separate housing without the family's consent. Item 2. Within 3 months of the wedding, Samantha must resign from her position as chief accountant or take a prolonged leave of absence to help manage the family business, Oak Bridge Appliances. Item 3. All monetary wedding gifts will be handed over to Barbara for safekeeping, designated for future baby expenses and to protect the couple's finances. Item 4. Any financial assistance Samantha wishes to give her mother must be pre-approved by her husband, as a daughter-in-law must prioritize her husband's family. Item 5. After having a child, Samantha must stay home for at least 2 years. Returning to work will require the joint approval of the husband's parents to ensure it aligns with family priorities. By the time I read the last line, my eyes were stinging, but I couldn't cry. The list wasn't long, but every line was a deadbolt locking a door in my face. One bolt on my career, a second on my finances, a third on my mother, a fourth on my autonomy. I suddenly realized you don't need ropes to trap someone. You just need to hide behind the word family. Mom placed the paper back on the table. Her voice remained steady. "Barbara, did you discuss these conditions with my daughter?" Barbara frowned slightly. "Well, that's what we're discussing today. The adults from both sides are here. Everything is out in the open. What's not clear?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Barbara, I can be responsible toward my husband's family. I can help with holidays, cooking, and taking care of the parents on both sides as much as I can, but I cannot quit my job just because I'm getting married. That career is the result of 8 years of my hard work." Aunt Brenda, sitting across from me, immediately jumped in. "Oh, girls these days talk so big. Career sounds so fancy. Your husband's family is offering you a wealthy life, and you're complaining." Another relative nodded. "Exactly. You get married, you live by your husband's rules. Otherwise, she'll cling to her corporate chair, and who's going to raise the kids?" I looked at Chris. I waited for him to say a single word, just one word. "Mom, whether she quits or not is Sam's choice." But he just pressed his lips together, staring into his glass of iced tea. Barbara continued, her voice growing sharper. "Samantha, I'll be honest. Our family has enough money to support a daughter-in-law. You'll come into our home, live comfortably, help me with the store's accounting, and when you have a baby, there will be plenty of people to help. That is happiness. A woman is valued by her husband, not by a salary that keeps her away from home at night." I turned to Chris. "Do you think so too?" He sighed. It was a very quiet sigh, but to my ears, it sounded like the snip of scissors cutting our final thread. "Sam, don't overcomplicate it. You really do have a stressful job. Mom just wants what's best for us. Stay home, help out the family, and then, when things settle down, we'll decide." I stared at him and suddenly saw a man who was both familiar and a total stranger. The guy who sat with me by the river and said he was proud of my independence was now using the phrase, "when things settle down," to hang my future on a hook, one it might never be taken off of. I asked slowly, "When they settle down? When your mom decides they've settled down? Or when I no longer have a path back to my career?" Chris stayed silent. Barbara gave a crooked smirk. "You aren't even a daughter-in-law yet, and you're already talking about your rights. Let me give it to you straight. Our family needs a daughter-in-law who knows her place, not one who argues. An accountant is good at crunching numbers, but a daughter-in-law needs to be good at compromising. My mom sat quietly through all of this, but I saw her hands clench in her lap. She wasn't speaking because she was waiting for me to speak for myself. I looked at the piece of paper on the table. On it, my life was mapped out into little boxes, itemized like an inventory sheet. But I wasn't inventory in their warehouse, and I wasn't a washing machine they could just plug in wherever they wanted. I said, "Barbara, compromise is an important quality in a family. But compromise doesn't mean abandoning my profession, handing my money over for safekeeping, or treating my own mother like a stranger. I respect my future in-laws, but I must also respect my own life." The atmosphere in the room thickened. The AC hummed. Muffled laughter drifted in from the main dining room, but at our table, everyone held their breath. Barbara glared at me. Her lips tightened into a thin line. The smile vanished entirely. "So, you don't agree?" Before I could answer, Chris gently tugged my sleeve under the table and whispered pleadingly, "Sam, don't make a scene." I yanked my arm away. A scene? I suddenly wanted to laugh. When my future is put up for auction in front of two families, that's not a scene. When my mother is ranked below their family rules, that's not a scene. Only when I say no does it suddenly become a scene. I turned to Mom. Her eyes were red, but her back was straight. In that moment, I knew she had been waiting for my answer. And I also knew that if I didn't stand up for myself, she would stand up for me. I put my hand on the piece of paper and slid it back across the table to Barbara. "That's right, I don't agree." The moment those words left my mouth, the table froze. And my mother, the woman who had been silent this entire time, slowly set her cup down. Her face was calm, but I knew what was coming. As soon as I said, "I don't agree," Barbara's face morphed. Up until then, she maintained the smile of an adult lecturing a child, but now the smile was gone. She looked at me as if I had committed unparalleled treason. Aunt Brenda slammed her cup down. Girls these days are so strange. The groom's family lays everything out clearly, and she catches an attitude. Once she's married, you won't be able to tell her a damn thing. She'll be walking all over her mother-in-law. Another relative scoffed. Exactly. Too smart for her own good. All they care about is rights and what they can get. When I got married, I did whatever my in-laws told me to, and I survived just fine. Listening to them, a lump formed in my throat. Yes, in the past, many people endured things. But compromising for peace is one thing. Compromising when your hands are tied is another. Someone suffers their whole life and then calls it destiny. I refuse to let the suffering of previous generations become the blueprint for my life. My mom still didn't speak. She was looking at Chris. "Chris, I will ask you one more time. Are the things written on this paper your mother's wishes, or yours?" Chris sat motionless, his fingers picking at the condensation on his glass. I stared at his hands, the same hands that held mine walking down the riverfront, that slipped the engagement ring on my finger, that promised to respect me. And now, he couldn't find the courage to give a single straight answer. Barbara interjected. "Mary, why are you interrogating him? Every family has its way of doing things. My son works at a bank. His head is full of big business. Domestic issues are for us adults to handle. That's how it is." Mom didn't look at her. Her eyes remained locked on Chris. "I am asking Chris, not you." The tension in the room was stretched tight as a guitar string. Chris swallowed hard, and finally, very quietly, muttered, "I think Mom is right about some things. Sam's job is too intense. If she takes a break after the wedding and helps out at home, and then we decide later, it will be for the best." Hearing that, I felt like I had fallen through the ice. So he wasn't just staying quiet out of fear of his mother. He stayed quiet because, deep down, he was on her side. He just didn't have the guts to tell me beforehand. He waited until both families were gathered, until the paper was on the table, until the peer pressure was so heavy that it would be almost impossible for me to refuse. I looked at him and asked quietly, "You knew about this in advance?" Chris looked away. "I just thought, if we talked about it here, in front of the adults, it would be easier to reach an agreement." I let out a broken laugh, and tears spilled down my cheeks. Easier to reach an agreement, or easier to force me? Chris fell silent. Barbara slammed her hand on the table, raising her voice. "Samantha, you are out of line. Our family is respectable. We own a business, we own property. My son is a banker. Marrying into our family is a stroke of luck for you. You're 31 years old. Keep chasing your little career and you'll end up alone. And then you'll only have yourself to blame." As soon as she finished speaking, my mother stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the tile floor. My mom wasn't tall or imposing. She was just a thin woman in an old navy dress with graying hair. But the moment she stood up, everyone at the table involuntarily shut their mouths. Mom placed her hand on the table. I saw it trembling slightly. And then, she slammed it down with incredible force. Bang! The coffee cup in front of her jumped. Aunt Brenda's fork clattered onto the tablecloth. The strike made not only the groom's family flinch but my own heart jump. Mom looked directly at Barbara and articulated every word, like the strike of a blade. "There will be no wedding." A dead silence filled the room. Chris jumped up. "Mary, why are you saying that? We're adults, we're just talking it out." Mom turned to Chris. Her voice was ice cold. "Precisely because this is a conversation between adults, I'm telling it to you straight. My daughter is not merchandise for your family to attach terms and conditions to. A wedding is a union of two families, not the hiring of an unpaid servant, and certainly not a recruitment drive for a free bookkeeper for your store." Barbara turned red. "You are insulting our family. I only wanted what was best for them. We have enough money to provide for a daughter-in-law. She would live in comfort and help the family out a bit. What is so wrong with that?" Mom gave a crooked smile, a look I rarely saw on her face. Living in comfort but abandoning her profession, handing over her wedding money, asking permission to help her own mother, and waiting for her in-laws' approval to return to work after having a baby? My daughter will not accept that kind of happiness. Aunt Brenda tried to interject, but Uncle Frank put his glass down and said slowly, "Brenda, let Mary finish. This concerns Samantha directly, not how many blenders they get from the registry." Barbara turned back to my mom, her tone dripping with venom. "Mary, take a look in the mirror. Your daughter isn't 22, she's 31. Marrying my Chris is the best she's going to do. We have a business, a house, everything. She's walking into a turnkey life. What more does she want?" Mom stared at her for a long time. "Happiness bought at the cost of freedom and dignity is a price I will not let her pay. Keep your turnkey life for yourselves." I lowered my head and slipped the ring off my finger. The white gold ring still sparkled, still fit perfectly, just like the day Chris put it on me. But at that moment, it felt so heavy I could barely breathe. I placed the ring on the table in front of Chris. "I don't regret agreeing to marry you. I regret the 2 years I spent believing you would have the courage to protect me." Chris stared at the ring. His eyes were red. "Sam, please don't do this. We love each other." I replied, my voice shaking but clear. "We do, but you left me all alone at this table." He had no answer for that. I stood up next to Mom. Aunt Carol hurriedly grabbed my purse. Uncle Frank stood up too, his face calm but his eyes fierce. On the groom's side, Megan was glaring at me with unconcealed hatred, and Barbara was shaking with rage. As we walked out of the private room, I heard Barbara yell at our backs, "Walk away, but don't think we'll come begging." With a stubborn attitude like that, she would have only destroyed our family anyway. My mom didn't turn around. She just gripped my hand tighter. In the hallway of the restaurant, laughter echoed from the other dining rooms. The smells of steak and perfume mixed in the air. Life around us buzzed as if nothing had happened, but I felt completely hollow inside. Chris ran after us into the parking lot and grabbed my arm. "Sam, you're really doing this? My mom is going to be humiliated." I turned and looked at him. For the first time, I clearly saw that the man I loved was hurting not because I was insulted, but because his mother had lost face. I asked, "And who will protect my mother's dignity? Who will protect my future?" His hand slowly dropped. I got into the car with Mom. I didn't sob out loud on the ride home, but hot tears streamed down my face. Mom sat next to me, holding my hand. Her thin hand was still trembling slightly from slamming the table, but it was that very trembling that pulled me back from stepping into a marriage where the locks had already been primed. That evening, I came home completely shattered. Mom didn't ask a bunch of questions. She made me a simple bowl of chicken noodle soup. I took a few bites and felt I couldn't stomach anymore. Mom sat across from me, her voice incredibly soft, as if she was afraid of breaking me further. "Eat a little, honey. Sometimes in life, you have to swallow a spoonful of bitterness today, so you don't spend the rest of your life eating ash." At that, I broke down crying not over the ruined wedding, but over Chris, the man I thought was my rock. In the end, all he could say was, "You're really doing this? My mom will be humiliated." Chris called me more than 10 times that night. I didn't answer. Texts poured in one after another. "I'm sorry, but you were too harsh. My mom is older. You rejected her in front of the whole family. She's in shock. Let's cool off for a few days and talk. I still love you." I read every line, and my heart grew colder. Funny. His apology had a lot of words, but an apology where the blame is split with the victim is like wiping away someone's tears just to scratch their eye again. The next morning, I took half the day off work. My eyes were swollen. My head was splitting. I thought the groom's family, despite their anger, would leave it at that. A canceled wedding is painful enough. Who would want to blow up a scandal and humiliate both sides? But I underestimated Barbara's ego. Around noon, Aunt Carol called my mom. Her voice was frantic. "Mary, Chris's family is spreading rumors all over town. They're saying Samantha canceled the wedding because she wasn't happy with the gifts and demanded they buy her a $400,000 condo in her name. When they refused, you guys threw a fit. Thank God they dodged a bullet, they're saying." I sat nearby and heard everything. My hands went cold. Mom asked slowly, "Who is saying this?" "Barbara's relatives. Brenda was telling people at the grocery store, others at church this morning." I jumped up. "Mom, I'm calling Chris." Mom grabbed my arm. "Why?" "Someone who wants to understand doesn't need long explanations. Someone who wants to smear your name will twist whatever you say to fit their narrative." I was shaking with anger. "So what? We just let them say these things, Mom?" Mom looked at me with an incredibly calm gaze. "We won't let them. We'll just wait for the right moment." That same evening, Megan posted on Facebook. She didn't use my name, but anyone who knew both families understood exactly who it was about. It's crazy these days. Some girls think that just because they have a fancy corporate salary, they can walk all over their fiancé's family. We try to plan a beautiful wedding, and she's complaining about gifts and demanding a free house. Didn't get her way, so she threw a tantrum. Thank God we woke up in time and didn't let that kind of toxic trash into our family. The comments flooded in. "Wow, girls today are so entitled. Always look at the family she comes from. A greedy woman is a curse on the whole family." Megan was liking every comment as if she had performed a heroic act. I read it, and the blood rushed to my face. My mother had lived her whole life honestly, never asking for a dime from anyone. And overnight, we were turned into greedy opportunists trying to extort real estate for a bride. But that wasn't the worst part. On the third day, I was called into the HR department at work. My director closed the door and looked uncomfortable. "Samantha, we received an anonymous call this morning. The person claimed you broke off your engagement as part of a financial extortion scheme, that you're volatile, and suggested we review your position as chief accountant because anyone handling company finances needs to have a spotless ethical reputation." Hearing this, I was struck dumb. This was no longer a family dispute. They were targeting my livelihood, and my career, as my mother taught me, was my route of retreat, the one thing I couldn't let be destroyed. I briefly explained to the HR director that it was a personal matter that was being maliciously distorted. I offered to provide proof if necessary. She looked at me and said, "I've worked with you for years, Sam, and I trust you. But be careful. When people call an employer, they aren't just venting, they're trying to ruin you." I came home in a state of terror and rage. Rage at the slander, and terror at realizing how fragile a woman's reputation can be, how a few vicious tongues can crumple it up like scrap paper. That evening, I told Mom, "I'm going to post everything online. Let everyone hear how they tried to force me to quit my job." Mom shook her head. "Don't rush into a screaming match with professional liars. It will only exhaust you. When the water is muddy and you start thrashing around, to an outsider, you both just look dirty." I bit my lip. "Then what do we do?" Before Mom could answer, Uncle Frank walked in. He walked into the kitchen holding his smartphone. Without saying a word, he placed it on the table. At the restaurant, when Barbara started making demands, I smelled a rat and turned on the voice memo app. I wasn't going to use it if things ended decently, but since they're dragging Samantha's name through the mud, we need this. I froze. Uncle Frank hit play. The voices from the restaurant came through crystal clear. Barbara's voice, demanding I quit, hand over the cash gifts, ask permission to help my mom. Then Chris's voice, don't overcomplicate it, mom just wants what's best. And finally my mother's voice, canceling the wedding. I listened, and tears streamed down my face again. But this time, not from weakness. From the feeling of a drowning person finally finding a piece of driftwood. My mom sat very straight. She looked at me and said, remember, honey, we don't need to scream to prove we are right. We just need to hold firmly to the truth. They are hitting us with lies, and we will defend our honor with evidence. That night was the first time I slept in days. Outside, the maple tree rustled. I was still hurt and angry, but the panic was gone. I realized that Chris's family might be loud, numerous, and used to bullying people, but this time, Mom and I weren't facing the mob empty-handed. The next morning, Mom brewed some coffee and placed Uncle Frank's phone in the middle of the table. She didn't play the recording again. Once was probably enough pain for her to endure. What mother can stand hearing her daughter's future being haggled over like cheap merchandise? I sat across from her, my eyes still puffy. Mom, are you going to post it online? She shook her head. No, not yet. I was surprised. But they're slandering us everywhere. Megan made a post. They called my HR department. Mom poured a cup of coffee. Her voice was slow but firm. Precisely because they have gone too far. We must act with dignity. We are not like them. First, I will send the recording privately to George and Chris with a clear demand. Delete the post, stop the slander, and apologize to the family. If they have any sense, it ends there. I looked at my mom. Sometimes I thought she was too kind. But then I realized this wasn't kindness. It was the strength of someone who knows exactly where they stand. The hothead wants to win the battle today. The wise person wants to win so decisively that their victory can never be challenged. Uncle Frank agreed. We have to do this step by step. Give them a chance to fix it. If they keep insulting you, we have all the grounds for legal action. Mom asked Uncle Frank to clip the key part of the audio, no editing, just the raw segment where Barbara reads the conditions. Chris agrees with her, and Mom cancels the wedding. She then sent the file to George and Chris with a short text. Our family does not want a public scandal, but the lies spread over the last few days are damaging my daughter's honor and affecting her employment. We demand you immediately cease the slander, delete the social media posts, and issue an apology. Otherwise, we will take legal action. Less than 10 minutes later, Chris called me. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. His voice was hoarse. Sam, I heard the recording. I answered. Yes. He paused for a few seconds. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I shouldn't have let my mom say those things. I closed my eyes. Shouldn't have let my mom say those things. As if he were just a bystander, helplessly watching, rather than the man who lowered his head in agreement. I asked, are you apologizing for what your mom said, or for the fact that you actually wanted me to agree to it? Chris sighed. I panicked. I was caught between you and my mom. You know how she is. If I had started arguing at the table, there would have been a massive scene. I let out a harsh laugh, though he couldn't see it. And trying to force me to quit my job at the table wasn't a scene? Humiliating my mother in front of your family wasn't a scene? Chris was silent. A moment later, he said quietly, I'll tell Megan to delete the post. But please, don't blow this out of proportion. My mom has a lot of pride. If this recording gets out, she won't be able to handle it. Hearing that, I grew even colder. Chris, to this day, you are only worried about what your mom can handle. Have you ever once thought about what my mom had to handle? What I had to handle? What my career had to handle? His voice trembled. I really do love you, Sam. I replied, love isn't a blanket you can throw over your mistakes to hide them. If your love doesn't protect the truth, the person you love still gets hurt. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but my heart wasn't as soft as before. Some phone calls don't bring you closer. They just illuminate how vast the distance between you has become. That evening, George replied to my mom. The text was short and a bit clunky. Mary, I listened to it. I swear to God I didn't know about that list of rules. I am going to talk to my family. Please give me a little time. Reading it, Mom just sighed. I knew she still held some respect for George. He was the only one who hadn't said anything insulting, but tolerating a dictator in the house for too long is also a form of complicity. I thought that after hearing the recording, Chris's family would stop. that Megan would delete the post and Barbara would stop gossiping to the neighbors. But no, that evening, Megan's post disappeared. Before I could even sigh with relief, she posted a new one. It's terrifying to live in this day and age. Some people come to a wedding planning dinner and secretly record the groom's family, then use it to blackmail them. It's terrible luck for decent people to cross paths with such calculating, manipulative women. The comment section exploded again, only now in a different direction. Instead of calling us greedy, they were calling us devious. Someone wrote, "The mother raised her alone as a widow. No wonder she taught her daughter to be so sneaky." Megan didn't push back. She replied with laughing emojis. Reading the word widow, my vision went black. My father's early death was a pain my mother carried deep in her heart. She lived her whole life alone, raising me, never harming anyone. And now, for defending her daughter, she had become a punchline. I grabbed my phone to reply, but Mom snatched it out of my hands. "Don't." I burst into tears of pure rage. "Mom, they are insulting you." Mom looked at the screen. I saw her lips tremble, but she locked the phone and put it down. "I know, but you need to stay calm. They want us to get mad. They want us to look like hysterical gossips. We aren't falling into that trap." I covered my face with my hands. For the first time in years, I saw how much my mother had aged. Not from the gray hair, but from the immense patience she was carrying that was causing me so much pain. Right then, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Is this Samantha?" "It's Lauren, the former bookkeeper for Oakbridge Appliances. I think you need to know the real reason Barbara wanted you to quit your job." I snapped my head up and looked at Mom. She was looking at me too. The exhaustion in her eyes vanished, replaced by deep alertness. A second text arrived. "If you are getting back together with Chris, ignore this. But if you want to know what you just barely escaped from, I'll be at the Cozy Mug at the end of the Riverwalk tomorrow afternoon. Come alone or with your mom. Do not tell Chris's family." I read every word, my palms sweating. Mom sat down slowly, her voice dropping. "You see, honey, that piece of paper with the conditions, that might not be the whole story. There might be something else behind it." Outside, the wind rustled the maple leaves. I stared at Lauren's message, remembering her piercing gaze on the day of the wake, a gaze that seemed to have been waiting for exactly this moment to speak. And for the first time, the heartbreak of the canceled wedding was replaced by a different feeling, a cold chill running down my spine. I left work early the next day. Mom insisted on coming with me. She didn't say much, just threw on a light jacket and put a small notepad and pen in her purse. That was my mom. The more serious the situation, the calmer she became. The Cozy Mug was near the end of the Riverwalk. It was mostly empty at that hour. Lauren had picked a corner booth, her back to the wall, facing the entrance. Seeing me, she quickly stood up. "Samantha, are you here?" I nodded. "Yes. And this is my mother." "Hello. I'm sorry for reaching out so out of the blue, but I saw what Barbara's family has been saying about you online, and I couldn't just sit by." Mom looked at her. "Lauren, tell us whatever you know, but I want to be clear. We don't want to play dirty. We will listen to facts. Speculation stays off the table." Lauren nodded immediately. "I understand." She had ordered a ginger tea but barely touched it. Her hands rested on the table. I remembered her look from the wake again. She started her story. She had worked as the bookkeeper at Oakbridge Appliances for almost 3 years. At first, the business was stable. George handled the warehouse, inventory, and deliveries, while Barbara managed the front end and the financials, purchasing, paying vendors, and invoicing. "Barbara is an excellent salesperson," Lauren said. But over time, she started getting creative with the finances. She would take deposits from new customers to pay off old vendor debts. She'd buy inventory on credit, then use the cash flow for personal things. There was an internal set of books, and another set for the vendors. As the bookkeeper, sometimes I looked at the spreadsheets and my heart would drop. I asked, "How much debt were they in when you left?" Lauren looked around and lowered her voice. "When I quit, the outstanding accounts payable to suppliers alone was around $150,000. Now it's probably higher. And the worst part is, George doesn't know about a chunk of it because Barbara explicitly told me not to include certain vendor aging reports in his weekly summaries." Mom frowned. "George really didn't know? He knows some things, but not the extent. He's a good guy. He trusts his wife." Barbara signed a lot of the purchase orders herself or had friends set up dummy accounts. Several truckloads of AC units were shipped, invoices issued, but there were no receiving reports. She'd tell me to log certain expenses as temporary adjustments, promising to fix the paperwork at the end of the month. When I refused to sign off on them, she told me I wasn't being a team player. I listened, and ice water ran through my veins. As a CPA, I knew exactly how dangerous the phrase temporary adjustments without backup documentation was. Lauren pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots of old emails. Barbara had written, "Leave this invoice off the report so George doesn't see it yet. Run this expense as a customer appliance repair. I'll get the receipt later. If the supplier calls, tell them I'll wire it Friday. Tell them to stop making a fuss." I read every line, my heart pounding. Lauren said she quit because she refused to be complicit anymore. She had a family, kids. She was just a W-2 employee. But when you are the one keeping the books and putting your initials on reconciliations, if the IRS or the vendors come knocking, they look at you first. I gripped my water glass. So why did Barbara want me to quit my job? Lauren looked me dead in the eye and spoke slowly. Because you are a licensed CPA. You know tax law, banking covenants, and commercial audits. Chris works in commercial credit. He probably knows some of it too. Their family desperately needed someone who could manage the books, talk to the bank, handle aggressive vendors, and pacify the IRS. She paused. If you had married him, quit your job, and started helping out at the store without an employment contract, without an official salary, without clear boundaries, you would become family. And it is much, much easier to force family to sign documents, cook the books, or co-sign a business loan to cover a shortfall. My mouth was bone dry. The list of conditions flashed in my mind. Quit within 3 months, help out at the store, hand over the wedding cash for safekeeping. Suddenly, the pieces snapped together. Quit my job so I lose my independent income, hand over the wedding cash so she could use it to pay off angry vendors, live with them so I couldn't easily say no, manage the accounting so I'd be dragged into her web of fraudulent books. My voice trembled. Did Chris know? Lauren hesitated. I can't prove Chris knew everything. But I saw him come home from the bank and ask his mom about past due accounts and the paperwork they needed for a new line of credit. He works in commercial lending. He's not stupid. He absolutely knew the store was in much worse shape than it looked from the outside. Mom let out a very quiet sigh. That sigh hurt me more than all of Lauren's words. I asked, "Aren't you afraid Barbara will find out we met?" Lauren gave a sad smile. I am. But I figured if someone had warned me in time, I would have left sooner and saved myself a lot of panic attacks. I didn't want another woman walking into that trap, completely blind to what she was signing up for. They say hindsight is 20/20, but sometimes, by the time you see clearly, it's too late. I sat there, stunned. On the drive back, Mom and I were silent. The city lights flickered on, commuters rushed home, and I was just processing the fact that I almost married a man who wasn't just spineless. I almost walked into a family that wasn't welcoming me out of love, but because my signature could shield their fraudulent ledgers. That night, I opened Chris's last text. Everything will be fine. The words now seemed sinister. Yes, maybe everything would be fine for his family if I had obediently walked right into their trap. The next morning, I went to the corporate office as usual, put on a crisp white blouse, pulled my hair back neatly, logged into my computer at exactly 8 a.m. On my monitor was the client aging report. The numbers stood in cold, perfect alignment. I had always loved this clarity. At noon, I texted Chris. Meet me tonight after work at the coffee shop near my office. I need to ask you a few questions. Before, I would have texted, I want to see you. But today, my fingers automatically typed the formal, I need to. Chris replied instantly. I'll be there. Just please, don't be so upset. He still just wanted me to not be upset, to not make a scene. But not once did he ask why I had reached this point. At 5 p.m., Chris was already waiting for me at the cafe. He looked exhausted. There was a glass of orange juice on the table, my favorite. Previously, that small gesture of care would have melted me. Now, it just made me sad. I sat down without touching the juice. Sam, he started. I've been thinking a lot. I know Mom and Megan were wrong. I'm going to talk to them. Just give me a little more time. I put my phone face down on the table and asked directly, Oakbridge Appliances is currently around $150,000 in debt to its suppliers. Is that correct? Chris's expression shifted instantly, just for a fraction of a second, but enough to tell me I hit the bullseye. He frowned. Who told you that? Is that true or not? Chris stayed silent. I continued. There are debts your father doesn't know about. There are temporary adjustments, missing receiving reports, and severely past due accounts, right? He looked out the window. After a moment, he asked, Did you meet with Lauren? I gave a bitter chuckle. So it's true. Chris started waving his hands defensively. It's not what you think. The store is having cash flow issues, but what small business doesn't? Mom didn't mean any harm. Lauren quit on bad terms. She's probably exaggerating out of spite. I looked him dead in the eye. Is the text saying don't show this to Dad an exaggeration too? Chris fell silent. I didn't want to beat around the bush anymore. I pulled a copy of the list of conditions from my purse and laid it on the table. Chris, why did this document specifically mandate that I quit my job and take over the store's accounting? He sighed heavily. Because Mom thought that, as a CPA, you could help clean up the books. What's wrong with that? We were going to get married. My parents' house would be your house. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, not from surprise, but because he finally admitted what I feared most. Helping is one thing. Being forced to quit my career, hand over my wedding gifts to cover your mom's cash shortfall, and needing permission to send my own mother $20 is a completely different thing. Do you see the difference? He lowered his head. I just thought, if you helped out for a bit, the store would get back on its feet, and then we could look for a house. I just wanted what was best for our future. I asked, for our future or for the future of your store? He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Sam, don't talk like that. I really do love you. Hearing those 3 words, I felt a bone-deep exhaustion. I used to believe love was the answer to many questions, but it turned out that love without truth is just a thin curtain covering a deep pit. I said slowly, if I wasn't a CPA, if I didn't understand tax compliance, banking, and commercial audits, would your mother still have demanded I quit my job to work in the store? He opened his mouth, then closed it. I waited. He stayed quiet. His silence was the only answer I needed. I nodded, confirming my own thoughts aloud. You knew. You knew exactly what your mom wanted. You knew the store was drowning. You knew that if you told me up front, I would never agree. So you let it escalate to a dinner with both families, hoping the pressure would make it too hard for me to say no. He rushed to object. I didn't plan it like that. I just thought that once we were married, you'd understand. Husband and wife are a team. When times are tough, you help each other out. I stared at him. The tears were gone. Chris, a husband and wife are a team when they enter a marriage knowing the truth. You and your mother wanted me to walk in blind, hand me a list of demands, saddle me with hidden corporate debt, and cut off all my escape routes. That's not asking for help. That's building a trap. He grabbed my hand. I immediately yanked it back. Sam, I was wrong. But we aren't married yet. We can fix this. I'll tell Mom to drop the conditions. I cut him off. You keep saying, I'll tell her. But when it was time to speak, you sat in silence. He dropped his head. I stood up. As of today, we have nothing left to discuss about a wedding. The only thing left is this. Your family needs to stop slandering me and my mother immediately. Otherwise, we will proceed legally using the evidence we have. He looked up at me, his voice shaking. Sam, don't talk to me so officially. It sounds so cold. I looked down at the man I had once trusted with my life. I am speaking to you exactly the way the current distance between us requires. I turned and walked out. Chris didn't follow me. He probably realized that some doors, once shut by the truth, can't be pried open with a few apologies. Stepping out of the cafe, the evening wind hit my face. I walked slowly down the sidewalk. My heart ached, but at the same time I felt immensely lighter. At least I no longer had to guess. He knew, and he chose silence. After meeting Chris, I went home and told Mom everything. She listened without interrupting. Only when I told her that Chris admitted the store was failing and that they wanted me to fix their books, did she close her eyes for a moment. Now everything is clear, she said. What's clear, Mom? Mom opened her eyes and looked right at me. It's clear you didn't lose a wedding. You dodged a bear trap. Those words left me speechless for a long time. In the following days, I tried to get back to my normal routine, but the rumors didn't die down. Acquaintances from Oakbridge told us that Barbara was now claiming I had conspired with Lauren to destroy their family business, fabricating debts to get revenge for the canceled wedding. Someone even added that my mom was trying to extort them for reimbursement of wedding prep costs. On Saturday afternoon, Mom and I were sitting on the front porch when several cars pulled up to our house. Barbara got out first, followed by Megan, Aunt Brenda, and a few other relatives. Without even walking up the driveway, Barbara started yelling from the sidewalk. "Mary, get out here! We need to talk! You don't want a wedding? Fine! But why are you spreading lies about our family, making up garbage about debts? We spent 20 years building our business just for your daughter to throw mud at it." Neighbors started peeking out of their windows. I felt the blood rush to my face. My mom calmly wiped her hands and walked down the steps. She didn't yell. She just opened the gate. "Barbara, since you drove all the way here, come into the yard. Screaming on the street won't find the truth." Barbara scoffed. "I'm afraid to step foot on your property. You might be recording me again." Uncle Frank stepped out of the house. Mom had called him that morning. He said calmly, "If you're telling the truth, you have nothing to fear from a recorder. Come in." That shut Barbara up, but it was too late for her to retreat. They walked into the yard. Mom gestured for them to sit at the patio table. Aunt Brenda started immediately. "Mary, you can't behave like this. The wedding didn't happen, fine. But why are you trying to ruin people's livelihoods?" Mom looked at her. "I've always taught my daughter to keep an exit strategy. That's exactly why she didn't marry into your family." Barbara slammed her purse on the table. "Save the pretty speeches. Your daughter met with that disgruntled Lauren and is now scaring my son with fairy tales. I demand to know, who do we owe? Where is your proof?" I stood up, walked inside, and brought out the binder Mom and I had prepared. Mom calmly spread the documents on the table: the copy of the conditions list, the transcript of the anonymous call to my HR department, screenshots of Megan's Facebook posts, the USB drive with the restaurant recording, and printed texts from Chris admitting the store's financial mess. Seeing the screenshots, Megan's face dropped. "I didn't use any names." I looked her in the eye. "You didn't use names, but you posted it right after the wedding blew up. Everyone we know understood who it was about, and someone, based on that, called my corporate HR department." Barbara snatched the printed texts, skimmed them, and pushed them away. "And what does this prove? The debt thing is just Lauren making things up to get back at me." Mom said calmly, "Barbara, I have no intention of judging whether your business practices are right or wrong today. I will only say this. My daughter had every right to be suspicious when your own son admitted you wanted her to run your books during a difficult financial period. If your hands were clean, you should have calmly explained things, not dragged a mob to my house to scream in my yard." Barbara flared up. "You're exaggerating. You talk about us like we're con artists." At that exact moment, a truck slammed on its brakes at the curb. Everyone turned around. It was George. Behind him stood Chris, not daring to look at me. George walked up the driveway. His voice was thick with exhaustion. "Barbara, get in the car. Haven't you embarrassed us enough? What the hell are you doing bringing the whole family here?" Barbara froze. For the first time, I saw panic in her eyes. George looked at the papers on the table, then at my mom. "Mary, if you don't mind, I'd like to see everything you have. Today, I want to find out exactly how much my own family has been hiding from me." The yard went dead silent. The man who needed to hear the truth had finally arrived. George sat heavily at the table across from my mom. Chris stood behind him, head bowed. Without a word, my mom pushed the binder toward him. "George, take a look. Everything is here, with dates and timestamps. I didn't want to publicly humiliate your family, but I will not let anyone slander my daughter." George picked up the list of conditions. The longer he read, the darker his face became. When he reached the part about handing over the wedding cash, he froze. Then he read the part about my resignation. He looked up at his wife. "You wrote this?" Barbara lifted her chin defiantly. "Yes, and so what? I was looking out for my son. Every family has its rules." George put the paper down. His voice grew dangerously heavy. "What rules? Forcing a girl to quit her career and hand all her money over to you?" He picked up the printout of Chris's texts. He turned to his son. "Chris, what does this mean?" Chris looked at his shoes. Dad, the store is having some cash flow problems. Mom said that if Sam took over the accounting, it would be easier to manage the bank audits. George slammed his hand on the table. A husband and wife are a team, but hiding this before a wedding, is that what an honest man does, son? Chris couldn't answer. Barbara immediately jumped in. Don't yell at him! I saw Samantha was smart. I wanted her to help. They were going to inherit the store eventually anyway. My mom said calmly, help should be voluntary and honest. Forcing my daughter to quit her job, hiding massive debts, and dragging her into your fraudulent accounting is not asking for help. It is entrapment. Barbara snapped. Don't exaggerate. You make it sound like we're criminals. George turned to her and asked slowly, then explain to me what this $150,000 supplier debt is. The entire yard stopped breathing. Barbara went pale. Who told you that? It's Lauren. She quit. She's just trying to ruin me. George pulled out his own phone. I don't need Lauren. The regional distributor called me this morning asking when we were going to clear our past due balances. He read me off a list of invoices I had never seen in my life. Barbara stammered. I was going to fix it and then tell you. George looked at his wife with a gaze full of agony and fury. Fix it? By dragging Samantha into it so she could put her CPA license on the line signing your fraudulent paperwork? Do you realize that a certified public accountant's signature is a federal matter? Barbara finally shut her mouth. This time, for real. Megan still tried to defend her mother. Dad, Mom was just trying to save the family. And anyway, Samantha wasn't even family yet and she's snooping around our private business. Is that right? Uncle Frank stepped forward. Megan, your Facebook posts caused reputational damage to my niece. If you don't delete them, apologize, and promise to never speak of this again, we will file a defamation lawsuit. Megan went white. The aunts who came as backup suddenly looked very interested in their shoes. Chris took a step forward, looking at me. Sam, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I thought I was stuck between you and Mom, so I stayed quiet. I never thought it would turn out like this. I looked at him. There was no longer a storm in my heart. You weren't stuck, Chris. You made a choice. It just took me until today to see what it was. George stood up and turned to my mom. Mary, on behalf of this entire family, I apologize to you and Samantha. I will make my daughter delete those posts and apologize. As for the store, I will handle it myself. He looked at his wife. And you? From today on, I am taking full control of the finances. Megan, hands shaking, deleted the post right there in our driveway and typed an apology in their extended family group chat. When they drove away, Barbara walked to the car last. She didn't apologize, she didn't look at us, but her normally stiff, proud posture was noticeably slumped. I watched them leave. The yard returned to normal. But one thing had changed. This time, we weren't the ones who lost face. After that day, our neighborhood went quiet. In Oakbridge, rumors about Oakbridge Appliances' financial trouble spread fast. Several suppliers showed up demanding payment. George had to hire an independent auditor to review the books. Discrepancies were found, and the store was hit with massive penalties. Losing money was painful, but losing their reputation in a small town was worse. George completely took over the business operations. Word had it Megan's husband chewed her out, telling her to stop dragging his name into her family's toxic drama. She stopped posting her life advice on Facebook. Chris was temporarily suspended from his commercial lending duties at the bank, pending an internal review due to the family's financial mess. He drove by our house a few times, standing by the gate. One evening, coming home from work, I found him there. Sam, he said, I know I messed up. If I could go back, I would have stood by your side from the very beginning. I looked at him calmly. Chris, some things, if you don't do them when you have the chance, you never get to do them again. Saying, if I could go back, is just you feeling sorry for yourself. Do you really not love me at all anymore? He asked. I paused. I don't hate you, but I no longer trust you. I knew that was truly the end. 3 months later, I was promoted to regional finance director. That evening, I took Mom to the nice restaurant by the Riverwalk. She wore her old navy dress, but her face was glowing. She smiled. You see, honey, even without that wedding, your life is still bright. I reached across the table and took her hand. The hand that had slammed the table, that held me when I cried, that had given me my foundation. If it hadn't been for this hand, I might have, out of fear of public embarrassment, walked right into a life full of deadbolts. After everything, I realized, being a daughter-in-law isn't a bad thing. Respecting your husband's family isn't a bad thing. Compromise in a marriage isn't a bad thing. But if the word tradition is used to force you to abandon your career, if respect means turning your back on your own mother, if family means seizing your finances, and if helping out means dragging you into fraud that isn't a marriage, that is a trap. A woman can be soft, but not so soft that anyone can mold her into whatever they want. You can love a man, but not so much that you forget your mother, your career, and your own dignity. Sometimes, a canceled wedding isn't a tragedy, it's a rescue mission life, hands you right before the prison doors lock behind your back.